Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. Volunteerism is so central to American life that most of us don't recognize how unusual this country is. But foreign visitors, from the great French writer Alexis de Tocqueville in the 1820s to Ukrainian guests from our sister city Kharkiv last year, are astounded at the willingness of Americans to get involved as volunteers, to help out one another, and to lift each other up. To be American is to be a volunteer. Last week, President Clinton was joined by past presidents and possible future presidents, as well as thousands of community leaders from across the country. Like all summits, the test of success is not what happens during the photo ops, but what happens afterwards. At a news conference on Thursday, a number of Cincinnatians who attended the conference joined Mayor Qualls to announce a local implementation plan that included some key elements.
Really do need to be encouraged to contribute their best thoughts and their points of view and perspective on these issues. And secondly, as I mentioned before, that young people really do need to be inspired and required to perform community service.
I am joined this morning by Mayor Qualls to discuss both the conference in Philadelphia and the challenge to translate its call into meaningful local action. Also joining us this morning is Sean O'Brien. Sean's a senior at Xavier University whose volunteer efforts during high school won him a 4-year service scholarship to attend Xavier, where he has continued his volunteer activity. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Good morning.
Thank you. Roxanne, that conference last week, we saw it, it was splashy, but it was all, the cameras tended to be focused.
Yes, it was a great photo op.
It was. And we all know that, but for the people who were there representing individual communities, not the Washington types, what was that conference like?
Actually, I was very impressed. I went into the conference as a skeptic, quite frankly, because here you had a huge number of folks, I think about 15,000 delegates, and it was a very short conference, and so what was going to get done? And yes, it started out with a photo op. It moved into a pep rally the next morning on Liberty Mall, what you could only describe as a revival, where people got focused on kids and children and volunteerism. And then, really, it's a compliment to the skills of the organizers. They moved 15,000 people into rooms, broke them down into working sessions, and focused them on looking at goals and objectives and examining best practices from other cities, and then broke them up again, put them back with members of their own delegations, and said, now, begin to work out a plan for your city, and then tell us what you're going to do when you go back. And so, we didn't lay out a 5-year strategic plan, but we sure as heck got to the point where on May 20th, the United Way is going to call a meeting of all the delegates plus people who wanted to go and couldn't go, and going to put together a plan to bring this community together, to bring its resources together, which there are many, to focus on accomplishing the 5 goals of the summit.
Sean, one of the challenges that Mayor Qualls laid out on Thursday was this challenge to get young people involved as volunteers. You're someone who has been involved a lot with volunteerism. What is it that has motivated you, and how has that motivation changed maybe between high school and college?
I mean, there are a number of motivations. I think the primary one is just getting out there for the first few times and seeing what it's like. For me, that came through family at a very young age, and most fellows, I think that's a common occurrence.
Came through family in the sense that you did things with your parents?
As a family, right. Primarily with my mother. She took us in. We did service events together with my brothers, and that's kind of the genesis of all of it. But I mean, the way that I think about community service is kind of this snowball effect, where you begin, there's a catalyst, there's a spark, and then it just kind of carries on, and you keep getting excited about it. The more experiences you have, the more you want to do it. So it just kind of rolls and rolls and gets bigger and bigger. So in that way, college was just a natural progression where I was able to devote serious time to doing service.
This sort of getting young people involved early on and then having it snowball, what is it that we can do here in Cincinnati to make it possible for more young people to do that right from the beginning?
Well, I think there are a number of schools, as both public and parochial, that already require young people to perform community service. And obviously there are a lot of civic organizations and religious organizations that don't require but do provide an opportunity for young people to perform community service. The summit really, while emphasizing the need for adults to intervene in the lives of young people who are at risk, also made a key point that young people need to learn how to give back to community through service. And one of the models that people were familiarized with was Maryland's model, which actually requires that community service is a prerequisite for graduation, and that it is, it's in high school, and some people are even looking at K through 12, that from a very early age we need to teach young people the value and also the responsibility of civic commitment and involvement.
Sean, what do you think about the idea of requiring students to do this, as opposed to providing the opportunities and encouraging them? What do you think about it, making it a part of the curriculum?
I think requiring it is a fantastic idea. I mean, obviously, requiring volunteering kind of is a paradox.
Right.
But on the other hand, like I said, I think it's just all you need is a beginning, a first push, and then you find the value of it. So, I mean, I don't think any of the requirements would be kind of, an extraordinary amount of commitment of time, but I think that probably what you'd find is that as you required it, as people got started, 99% of them would want to continue and do more, and that's the whole point, I think, is to continue doing service throughout a lifetime. So I think it's a good idea.
And I do think, it is a paradox when you say volunteer and require. And I think that's why when the summit talked about what it was requiring, it was requiring community service. And it's back to a very different notion, which is that it is very important as part of just the overall learning that a young people experiences, and as part of the expectations that we as a community and as a society have of young people, is that they understand that they are as responsible as government, as adults, in making the community better, and that this is not a society, our democratic society is not a society in which we can afford to allow to develop an attitude where everybody else is going to do it for you. We have to do it for each other and for ourselves.
For all of the energy that was surrounding that summit, there was a lot of criticism too.
Oh, sure.
I got to tell you that back here listening to talk radio, having people call in and saying, well, now the government's telling them, besides paying all these taxes, that they also are insisting that we now have to volunteer, and this is just government coercion in another aspect of our life. And then other people saying, well, all this volunteerism is just an excuse to cover the withdrawal of government support for people who are in serious need. I mean, sort of from left and from right.
Oh, sure.
Lots of criticism. How, back in the community, how do we structure a plan that recognizes those sorts of criticisms, that is concrete and really tries to move beyond that?
Well, first of all, let me just tell you that in Philadelphia, when I was going to Liberty Mall and to hear the president speak, I looked across the street and there were protesters, and they had pre-printed signs, some of which said, "Service equals slavery with a smile." Now, I have to tell you, I was shocked, because my entire life I have grown up being told that your duty and your responsibility is to serve your community, and that in no way has that ever been considered slavery with a smile, but rather a personal responsibility that every person has. I think what you have to do, though, getting to your question, is what we're planning to do under the leadership of the United Way, to really come back into the community and say, we do have a lot of needs, but we also have a lot of things already occurring. We need to look at what it's going to take to accomplish the 5 goals of the summit: a healthy start for kids, a meaningful relationship with an adult in every kid's life, kids being prepared to earn as soon as they finished learning, a safe place, the whole routine. And maybe not even necessarily do more of what we're doing, but maybe do some different things. And how do we use the resources, supplemented by pulling together the forces of this community through volunteer efforts that actually enhance what we're already doing as a volunteer effort. I guess I'm not going to respond to folks who, say things like that, because quite frankly, they are so far out of the mainstream of what made this country and makes this country a great country. They're perfectly free to believe what they're saying. That's fine, and they're perfectly free to choose not to volunteer, and they will. But when you started this program, you held up Alex de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. And you know, the one unique attribute that every single political observer has seen in this country and this people called Americans have been historically their willingness to do something which no other people were willing to do, and that is on their own time, you know, from their own talents and resources, come together to make their communities better, to not rely upon government in every instance. And you know, the irony is this is something which, you know, brings together Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, and you know, you can debate about what's the best way of doing it. But fundamentally, as Americans, we shouldn't debate that this is one essential ingredient of making up who we are.
Sean, in all of the experiences that you've had, what is it that, you know, you can talk about maybe what you've done for people, but what have these experiences done for you, to you, how they made you who you are right now?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's no way to quantify what you've done for others, but I can say that probably 1,000 times more I've received, and that's no question. A sense of really belief in what we're doing as a community and who we are, a real sense of hope, a real sense of the power of people to touch one another's lives, and how that's not a one-way street.
What's the best volunteer experience that I'm not talking about a single incident.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about what's the best situation you've ever found yourself in, concrete situation?
That's a hard question. I think, well, in terms of real personal growth, I worked in a St. Mark school in Evanston, and that was just such a challenge of my beliefs, a challenge of going through the challenges of living in Evanston and being educated in Evanston with these children. It's not a matter of, you know, volunteering to them or helping them, but going through it with them was so powerful and profound. It was my first experience as a fellow my freshman year, coming in wide-eyed and kind of very optimistic and idealistic. And I left with these same ideals and the same optimism, but a lot more sense of urgency, I suppose.
One of the things I think that you've proposed is that you encourage city workers to get involved as volunteers, and that maybe the city can provide some time off and leverage that.
Well, actually, I should be a little clear.
Okay.
The concept is based upon what the presidents at the summit called for, and that is for employers to try to help people who are their employees volunteer and to build upon what they're already doing. And so in the private sector, we've seen our different ways. I mean, they work out all very differently, but the basic concept is that for every hour you give, we'll help you give another hour so that we can all get as a community. Now, the actual proposal hasn't been unveiled yet and won't be unveiled until Wednesday because it's really going to be a matter of helping to leverage city employees that are already giving and encouraging others to give already who are volunteering. And I think that's one thing to emphasize. So, you know, if you give an hour a week, then we'll help you leverage another hour, and we're going to do it at the same time as benefiting the city. And so stay tuned for Wednesday. I think you'll be very surprised considering that there have been some issues raised about this, but they're good questions. It's just a shame they're raised before the actual proposal's been unveiled.
Besides you representing the city or being the mayor anyway, there were people from industry, there were people from lots of fields. Do you expect to see other companies locally, other organizations locally come through with that same sort of thing?
Well, we already have seen a number of companies come through. Synergy has come through, LensCrafter has come through, Procter & Gamble has come through. One of the things which I am urging the delegation to take on is to reach out to the community, to the business community, to the civic community, and the religious community, and to do the Cincinnati Pledge Book. One, it gives us an opportunity to really go beyond social agencies and find out what people are doing, because there are a lot of activities occurring in churches, you know, Rotary clubs. People are already doing mentoring and tutoring. But then, secondly, challenge for those organizations that aren't doing things to meet the goals of the summit, asking them to take on a project and getting their pledges, and then also looking at asking them to think of new ways. For instance, potentially ask the churches, and this is where we're going, asking the churches to perhaps adopt a young person who could provide a year of community service, that the church would actually make that possible for a young person who wants to do that, so that they could give back. And you know, the summit generated a tremendous amount of very good ideas, such as how to make volunteering easy, how to reach out in your community, focus your efforts, but then also how to really go into the lives of kids and help them.
Sean, we're almost out of time, but one final question. Did you find the students at Xavier University talking about the summit as it was going on earlier last week?
Certainly among the fellows, I think there was
the service fellows.
I'm sorry, the service fellows.
Mm-hmm.
There's conversation about that. Anytime volunteers comes up, we're real excited about that. And I do think, I mean, Xavier is a very volunteer-oriented campus. Lots of people are excited about it. So I definitely think it was a current on campus.
Well, I can't not say good luck. You're about to graduate, and he's headed to Notre Dame to study Irish literature. Anybody with that name studying Irish literature is okay with me, and thank you for being here as well. When Cincinnati announced it was interested in hosting the Olympics in 2008, the Olympic Committee said, show us the money. Well, last week Cincinnati did just that by putting up $100,000 in earnest money. Where do we go from here? Join me after the break and we'll find out. Welcome back. The race to land the Olympics for an American city in the year 2008 passed from the let's talk about it stage to the let's make a commitment stage this week. In addition to Cincinnati, 7 other American cities put up $100,000 as a sign of commitment that they were serious about seeking the Olympics. Now that that field has been defined, the real race begins. Since last summer, former Cincinnati council member Nick Vehr has steered Cincinnati's Olympic effort. As president of the Greater Cincinnati 2008 Amateur Sports Association, Nick now has to figure out how to make sure Cincinnati is prepared to set a pace that will show it can both break out of the pack and also have the legs for the stretch run. Nick, welcome to Newsmakers again. We've been trying to follow this.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for the attention to the issue.
Where do we really stand as of this moment, as you understand it? You think eight cities are serious about it?
Well, it's my understanding that yesterday, or last week at the close of business, 8 U.S. cities have turned in a check for $100,000, letters of intent signed by the city's mayor, and responses to some basic questionnaires. Now, apparently, the United States Olympic Committee is going to look at that information, and tomorrow will announce of those 8 cities which ones have met the requirements to be considered for the process that the USOC has yet to determine they're going to have. And that is a process to select a U.S. city for the 2008 Olympic competition. Everyone believes, though, that with non-refundable $100,000 checks, that it's extremely unlikely that the USOC will turn that money away and say, well, we're not going to have a process. So I think we're at the starting gate. I think we're at the beginning of an incredibly intense competition that will last about 2 years. In about 2 years, one United States city will be selected to go into the international competition to see who gets to host the 2008 Olympics.
As you understand it, what are the cities that are in the running at this point, assuming that there is actually a process here and that they all get accepted?
For many months now, it was Seattle, Cincinnati, and Houston that were perceived to be the serious players. In the last minutes, the San Francisco Bay Area, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, New York City, and New Orleans all came up with their $100,000 checks. Now, some would say that there's 3 ahead of the pack and 5 lagging behind. Quite frankly, I think that's eight cities at the starting gate together, and we'll see what the competition is like as we move forward.
Now, the person who is organizing out in Seattle, last week I saw in a news story a very nice compliment about Cincinnati being serious competition. How do you take that?
Well, first of all, it's always wonderful when you get praise from your competition. That's the best praise you can get. It may be a bit like Rick Pitino, though, who says that every team he ever plays is the best team that they've ever faced, and he may be doing a little positioning there. I don't much care, because I think when we get down to the end, we'll see who lasts and who doesn't. I think Seattle is very strong competition. I think they're a lot like our community. They're on the water, they're beautiful, they're innovative and creative, and they move, they make decisions, and they're generally referred to as a second-tier city as opposed to some of the big metropolitan areas like New York or Houston. And I tend to think that the next Olympics that comes to the United States will come to a second-tier city.
Why is that?
I think it's because the major urban centers already have so many challenges to deal with, and that the Olympics is so big that what they need is not only a single city, but a region. And they need a city and/or a region that is flexible, that is willing to work with the Olympic organizers and to make the changes that need to be made to pull this thing off. And I think large cities, because they're so large and they move so slowly, are less adept at doing that than we could be.
Now, that, on the other hand, though, second-tier cities, a place like Cincinnati, may have some other challenges that it has to show that it can make some changes and whatever. What do you think are our biggest challenges that you're going to have to convince local people to do in order to position us to really stay out front?
Well, an important thing we have to do, first thing we should all just take out of the lexicon is that phrase second tier. I hate that. I mean, we're not a second tier city. We're a great city. I know. I said it and I shouldn't have. But the other thing we need to do, I think, is we need to challenge our perception of what the city is. We all think in terms of Cincinnati, and many of us think in terms of the municipal corporation of Cincinnati. The truth is the Atlanta, quote, Atlanta Olympics were in Birmingham, Alabama, Savannah, Georgia, 270 miles away, Washington, D.C., Miami, Florida, Orlando, Florida, Chattanooga, Tennessee. The, quote, Los Angeles Olympics in California in 1984 were all up and down the west coast of California. So, folks, the, quote, Cincinnati Olympics are likely to be greater Cincinnati, northern Kentucky at the center, but Dayton, Columbus, Indianapolis, Louisville, Lexington, what is really a very compact region, much more compact than the, quote, Atlanta Olympics or the, quote, Los Angeles Olympics.
You've talked about it this way right from the beginning, and this is one of the things that's been fascinating me because I see it as a tool to build regionalism, which I happen to believe is the most important thing here. But since the last time we talked, a couple months ago, have you had substantive conversations with people in Indianapolis, in Columbus, in Louisville, in Lexington? Are they on board with us, or are we just using their names?
We have had informal discussions. We didn't want to go and have the formal discussions with those communities about their involvement until we could define for them how they might be involved. We're in the process of a very comprehensive feasibility study that's taking a look at a number of things, including facilities and what we have and what we don't have within this broader region in the context of Olympic competition. Once we complete that, we'll be able to go to these other cities and suggest that perhaps this facility and this sport matches perfectly with your community, and this facility and this sport with your community. Some are very obvious, Lexington and the Kentucky Horse Park. That's kind of an obvious connection. And making those approaches, they become less burdensome things for those communities. Quite frankly, they get more benefit than anybody else because they have an existing facility. They'd have to make it look very nice, and they'd have lots of people staying in hotels and eating at restaurants and buying tickets and showing up at their cities doing all those things that economic development people love for them to do, which is spend money.
Wouldn't that be the same thing with a place like Indianapolis with the bicycling, the velodrome that's there that most people probably don't even know exists, but it already sits right there in Indianapolis?
Absolutely. This is a region that is rich in facilities. If you think about this region and you think about city of Cincinnati or the greater Cincinnati region at the center with $500 million in sports stadiums coming online. You just had a student from Xavier. They've got a $12 million a 12,000 seat convocation center coming online. And you look at that, and then you look at things like convention centers in each of these cities, and you think of the University of Louisville and University of Kentucky and Indianapolis University and University of Dayton and Ohio State and other universities all have strong intercollegiate programs. and with strong intercollegiate programs, all have sports facilities. We're just at the beginning of making this thing work.
Well, we're going to continue to follow it. Thanks for
Great.
being
Thank
with
you.
us. And thank you for being with us this morning. Join us again next week.